At number 9, the confusion. Let's try and work this out. If you listen to the politicians, you'd think we'd have 3 options available to us as a population in this referendum. We actually have 2. Let me break that down. The gerbil-faced ego warrior known as Cameron has allegedly gone out and tried and negotiated and reformed. And you can tell this because he's walked in and out of many buildings. Watch this. He walks in, he says stuff to the press, and then just walks off again without waiting for a question, or a little bit rude if you ask me. Anyway, the point is, he went originally to Europe with 10 ideals. 10 points he wanted to reform on, to bring back for us to then vote on. He got 4. Here are the 4. Now, you might think that's great, and fair enough, that is your call. That's fair enough with me. That's the whole point of this video. However, these reforms aren't actually in stone. Now, they've been proposed, and in theory, everything's going to be hunky-dory, but these reforms would, under EU legislation, need a new treaty. And that hasn't been proposed yet. That hasn't even been mentioned yet. In fact, if you vote yes, theoretically, they don't actually have to come up with the goods, because it's only on a promise. It's only on someone else's word.
Now, listening to that interview is Alan Johnson, former Labour Cabinet Minister who is spearheading Labour's pro-European campaign. Welcome to you.
Hi.
One of the things that happened this week, Alan, was it became clear that the Prime Minister was not going to be able to negotiate any kind of hard new terms before the referendum. He's going to have to come back with, in effect, a promissory note saying, this is what they have told me we will get if we vote to stay in. That's not a very good basis for a yes vote campaign, is it?
Well, I think what's happening with the Prime Minister is a kind of sideshow that relates to the Conservative Party more than it does to our national interests.
But of course, we've never heard of promises being broken before.
From next year, we will reduce the level of earnings at which a household's tax credits and universal credits start to be withdrawn.
Stop the wrong-headed, ill-thought-through piece of legislation.
These proposals blatantly threaten damage to the lives of millions of our fellow citizens.
I've listened to the concerns. I hear and understand them. The simplest thing to do is not to phase these changes in, but to avoid them altogether. And to give more power to counties and to our new mayors, we're going to give them the power to set the Sunday trading hours in their areas.
The ayes to the right, 317. The noes to the left, 286.
The disability budget will still rise by more than £1 billion and will be spending more in real terms supporting disabled people than at any point under the last Labour government.
That is deeply unfair and was perceived to be unfair, and that unfairness is damaging to the government, it's damaging to the party, and it's actually damaging to the public.
We will not be going ahead with the changes to PIP that had been put forward.
We're going to complete the task of setting schools free from local education bureaucracy, and we're going to do it in this Parliament.
But we have decided it is not necessary to take blanket powers to convert good schools in strong local authorities to academies at this time.
And they can easily, through the rigmaroles of back alleys and all sorts of political junctions, mix it up, confuse it, take longer to actually initiate it, to the point where we may even get kind of stuff. So, slight confusion there. On the other hand, Alan Johnson. Now, I like Alan Johnson. He's a nice fella. You can tell he's a nice fella. He's the sort of fella you could sit down over a pint with and have a good old chin-chat. He's a lovely fella. He comes across lovely. However, I'm sorry to say he is wrong. Now, we've seen how difficult it was for David Cameron to go in and out of all these buildings, all shiny, looking stern-faced to go, oh, I'm going to negotiate, oh, we need to reform, oh, and only get 4 of his original 10. And if you want to see his original 10 points, they're in the Conservative manifesto. So, how on earth does Alan Johnson and his ilk think they can reform the EU from the inside? If it took so long, and it was so difficult, allegedly, for David Cameron to get what he wanted, how does Alan Johnson and the Labour Party think they can achieve better? Now, don't get me wrong, what the EU, what we normally think of the EU, what it should stand for is like almost like the NATO agreement. You kind of come together for certain things, and normally you can work on your own stuff, but if someone's in trouble, you come out and help each other at like a brotherhood of men and ladies. But that's not what the EU is. It's not democratic. And in fact, this is a very rushed version of how the EU works. Brace yourselves. The EU's executive body, who's responsible for proposing and implementing EU laws and monitoring the treaties and the day-to-day running of the EU, is all done by the European Commission. These people are totally unelected. No elections, nothing. The proposed legislations coming from the European Commission then go to the European Council. Now, these are the heads of state or government of the EU member states. So, for example, David Gerbelface. Him. This, allegedly, is a strategic body that decides the EU's political direction. What really happens is that they just debate whether or not the legislation that the European Commission has proposed continues or needs more work. They cannot propose new legislation. From the European Council, it then goes to the Council of European Union. It's confusing. It's even got the same logo. Just don't trust. It took me a while to work that out as well. The Council of the European Union is the government ministers from different departments meeting up with their counterparts. So, for example, the Treasury people come along, meet all the other Treasury people, maybe the farming and fisheries representative from us go and meet all the other farming, etc., etc. In many councils of the European Union. Now, they share budgetary and legislative powers with the European Parliament. What really happens is that each council within the Council of the European Union, meeting up with their counterparts, they all pick at the legislation. They make sure it will work. They debate. But really, they're just making sure they can brace themselves when it finally gets back home. After all of this work, finally it goes to the European Parliament, which is the only directly elected EU body. Now, the EU Parliament represents all 500 million inhabitants of the European Union, and allegedly plays a key role in electing the President of the European Commission. But the last election, there was only one candidate they could vote for. So, democracy hard at work there. It shares powers over the EU budget and the legislation with the Council of the European Union. However, the Parliament only really goes yay or nay on every single paragraph of the article of legislation. It cannot propose legislation. It cannot call back legislation. Once it goes to the Parliament, all they do is yes or no. And that is a brief summary of what the European Union and all its bits do. Told you it was brief. And don't comment, yes, I've cut out a lot. I know, but that's the basics. Once the legislation is complete, it is automatically adopted by the UK government. No ifs, no debates, nothing. Straight in. If you agree with this, vote to remain. If you don't agree with this, vote to leave. It is your choice.